Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Good morning, Beth. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here. I love to talk, so good for both of
It's
us.
my pleasure, Beth. Yeah. So, Beth, I was, the usual thing that I do before a podcast is go through as much information as possible over the guest. And I did the same. I know we had a pre-podcast call as well. But just to look into a LinkedIn profile gave me an impression that you've always, been in the education domain since the start. But I'd like to ask from you, uh, how and why did you get into the world of education?
So I grew up as a steelworker's daughter in Eastern Pennsylvania. My father was a steelworker. My mother was an at-home mother, and there was no expectation that I would go to college because there was no expectation that women would go to college where I came from. On my mother's side, I'm the first female to graduate from high school. So there was no expectation at all. So in my 11th grade year, I was like, I don't want to be a housewife. Like, I don't, and the steel industry was failing at the time. So I'm like, I could see that times were changing. And so I thought, well, I better figure something out. So I went to our community college. It ironically happens to be the one that I currently work at now. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know, and this was before they had what's called dual enrollment, which we have now. So I took courses in 11th grade to sort of prepare me because I hadn't been in the college track. I had been in, sort of like the, just graduate and marry somebody track. So I went to the community college for 2 years, and then I transferred to a small private liberal arts Roman Catholic college called Allentown College of St. Francis de Sales, where they have grown and now they're DeSales University, and I've been teaching there for past 28 years. So I've kind of stayed close, even though I've lived all over. I've stayed close to the two colleges I went to for my undergrad. And I wanted to be the teacher from Dead Poet Society. I don't know if you saw that movie, but
Yes, yes, I did.
barbarically yapping. I wanted to be that because that those kind of teachers always inspired me. And I came up through a time when it was worksheets and take notes, write a paper. You were very disconnected from the learning. And I really wanted to be. I had a very inspirational high school senior year high school teacher who was very much that John Keating, and I wanted to be that. So I went to school, went to grad school. My first teaching job was in a prison. I taught
Wow.
adult basic education and GED, and I just really, really, kind of zoned in on the space. But I then started working for Northampton Community College, where I left and came back. But I started there, and then I went to Penn State. So I taught at Penn State on a fixed term contract. So they have different kind of contracts here, but that's a fixed term. So I knew that would be temporary, but I was young. And then I went to a neighboring community college, Lehigh Carbon, and I've always used technology, commercial grade video games like Fallout, Grand Theft Auto, things like that, to teach literature. Because at the time the research was that young men wouldn't read, and it's true they don't want to read Secret Life of Bees, but they will read the manual for Grand Theft Auto. They will read the screen in Fallout and read what's going on so they make their decisions correctly. And Fallout I like because it's a sort of a choose your own adventure module. It's like that genre. So I started using AI, and I started using when the Alexa first came out, I started using the game programming open source code to teach grammar. So, they didn't have to learn coding, but they could learn basic sentence structure for how to think about voice programming and how to think about what you would ask something for it to return something. And that's all sentence structure. So I look at technology very differently in the teaching of English and literature. I still use games. I'm teaching American Romantics right now. We used Walden, which is a game on Steam, where you can simulate being Henry David Thoreau and go around Walden. And tomorrow night when I have class, we're going to do a virtual tea party with a transcendentalist. So I try to incorporate technology. I use a lot of AI in my teaching right now because that's the world my students are going into. So that's how I got in this space. I went from teaching and then the things that I used, and then I helped other teachers and this was before there was even a degree called instructional design. I would help other teachers that would get course releases to help them. And then over time, it was like I was getting so many course releases and not teaching a lot of courses that I became an administrator. But I still teach. So I'm an administrator that teaches.
Wow, that is awesome to say the least. Uh, but what I'm gonna as a follow-up question, what I'm gonna ask, what caught my thing was, you said your first job was teaching at a prison. Did you have a choice, or you just had to do it? You had a
No, I had
choice.
a choice. So when I was in grad school, I'm a firm believer in doing volunteer work. Like we should all give back, right? We should all give back. So when I was in grad school, like my giving back was I volunteered at a local prison to help with literacy. So I would go in and I meet with inmates, and my mom was very involved in our community back home, and so her friend was the warden of the prison, and in this county, I'm not sure if this is true all over the states, but at least in this county, the prison itself cannot make a profit. So if an inmate dies or an inmate leaves or whatever, and the money is still left in the prison in the commissary, they can't make a profit. They can't use it. They have to use it on the inmates. So the warden had some extra money, and he said, we have this partnership with this community college. It's not going well. Can you come in and create an education program for us? So there I am, 23 years old, adorable, right? Cute and little. I go in and I create this education program where the inmates, we would meet with them. They'd have to sign a contract. They could only miss class for court or medical. They each had their own learning plan of 3 things that were a goal for them, whether it was to take the GED. In most cases, it was just to learn the basics of reading, but I would teach how to balance a checkbook. And this is really when computers were not, there were no computers in the prison, but things like how to fill out, back then it was paper applications for, what kind of job do you think you're going to get with a criminal record, right? So let's fill out applications for McDonald's and for places like that, and really try to help them. I will say they were excellent at math. They didn't call it algebra, but I could give them, if you broke everything down into like, okay, Joe owes you this much money because he bought this much whatever from you, and he only paid you, excuse me, he only paid you this much. How much does he owe you? They would be like, in their head, they could figure that out. That's algebra. Solving for X, that's algebra, right? So, they didn't, the fancy terms of education didn't resonate with them, but they were doing that kind of stuff in their daily lives anyway. So great at business, understood business very, very well. Not very, very well, or they wouldn't be where they were, but you know, so I really enjoyed it, but I only had 1,000 hours. That was what that, and I got paid $10 an hour. That's think simple math for me, but there was only 1,000 hours. So at the end of the 1,000 hours, then I was hired by Northampton for a full-time job with benefits and all that.
Wow. I mean, you didn't have any uh, doubts, second thoughts about wanting to go and teach, and was it a very easy choice? Uh,
So, it's interesting. So I chose to do the training that they give for the officers, which I didn't have to do. I didn't do all of the training. Like I didn't, because I would never be like putting them in solitary confinement, but I did like 90% of the training. And I was just, because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And the relationship that the COs had had with the previous people that were doing education was very poor, because you can't bring anything into a prison. Like you cannot,
right.
things that you don't think about, like pens, like those can become shivs, and like ballpoint pens, because they come apart, they can make knives out of them. So, you like, I had to think about their, like the work that they have to do. Like, yes, I want these folks to leave the prison and have another option other than crime, but you also have to respect that care, custody, and control is the focus of a prison. At least in the States, that's our that's how we do things. So I worked really closely with the COs to say, like, how do we secure it? I would say the only time that I ever felt threatened, because I was very tiny and I wasn't married. So I went out and I bought a $10 wedding ring and I wore it. So they would think I was married, because they would all, of course, spread rumors that they were, doing this and doing that to me. And one guy I knew from high school, he had all kinds of stories about me that weren't true. But the one time an inmate like got right in my face, and I had left. I was the this is a while ago. So the walkie-talkies they had were so heavy that it couldn't fit on my pants because it would pull my pants down. So I'd always leave it in my office, and I didn't have my office. And I thought, well, this is it. This guy's he's going to go boink, and I'm going to be flat. But he was really just making a show for the others, that he wasn't going to put up with crap from the teacher. But he ended up being an informant for the prison, so it was really just a show. Like it was a whole world that I had no idea, but I will say it informed my teaching for the next 30 years because, if you work in a prison, you can work anywhere.
Exactly. That's what I was going to ask. So you said I mean, it's interesting the way you put it. You said you only had 1,000 hours. Well, 1,000 hours is 1,000 hours. And what I wanted to ask was, everybody about things that we don't know, things that seem very far from our normal lives. Prison is one of those such things. And then, we have a certain perception. We don't even bother to cross check or find out what we think is true or not. But when you finished your 1,000 hours, were you changed in any way? What did you take away from that? Did it impact you in any way? I just want to know about all that.
It's interesting. My brother's a CO at another prison, and I will say that in order to be a good CO, you have
And
to
what is a
think like,
CEO? I'm so sorry, Beth.
I'm sorry, corrections officers, the officers that
Corrections
work there.
officers. Right,
The
right.
COs are the officers that, I'm sorry. That so it's a fine line because they really, in order to do their jobs well, they have to think like inmates all of the time. And that actually informed me when I got into ethical hacking because you have to think like a hacker all the time to be a good ethical hacker. You have to know how to do the crimes and then you have to know how to solve them. You have to know how to spot them and then how to solve them. So I think that, and I think too, like my idea of what the justice system is and does, um, some of the people were, I never asked the inmates what they were in for, and I never looked it up. If they wanted to share it with me in their journals, that was okay. But I didn't want that to color. And most of my inmates were men, but I did have one class of females. And, most of the females that are in county prison are in for prostitution or drugs. And most of the guys are in for drug related stuff. The real serious crimes, they might be held over to go to the state prisons, but most of the county folks are there for drugs and, not paying child support and things like that, drunk
Right.
driving, that kind of thing. And you think, wow, like one bad decision, like now you're here and now your choices are limited, right? Forever. Like your choices are limited to what you can do and what you can buy and really I think the thing that I sticks with me years later are the families that would come in to visit on because the inmates would get visitors and stuff and like the children that come and think that this is normal, like this it's normal to go see mom or go see dad in prison. And so it's not like in my family nobody would have visited me. My mother would not have come, she would not have come, she wouldn't, my father, they would not have come, they might have written me a letter but they would not have been seen, anywhere near that prison. But there's no stigma, and so then that sort of life perpetuates, and it isn't seen as a bad thing in some of the groups of people that came there. So you know I think I don't know how we solve the justice problem, but and that county prisons are different than state are different than federal, and then we have white collar prisons as opposed to other kinds of prisons. So this was just one. The prison itself, though, was funny, was brand new because the old one was built with asbestos, so they had to knock it down. And so the neighborhood, like the people in the county would just complain and complain because it was this pretty prison. Like it is not pretty on the inside. It smells like dirty socks and smells like sweat and pee and like it's not pretty on the inside. Like it may look nice and that's for you because they don't see it on the inside, they see it on the outside. But we I think education is not a huge part of that culture, but I gave credit. I mean, for the inmates, they were just doing it because it got them off the unit. So while I had them, I had to, that hour a week or hour every 2 days, I had to like try to inspire them that learning was something good, that they could maybe then take that home with them and maybe have, our statistics are sad worldwide, I think, but especially around here, most of them will come back. One guy who I loved, he was a young guy, 18, and he said, they used to call me Miss Beth. Miss Beth, this is an occupational hazard. I make a lot of money selling drugs. This is just a hiccup. I'll be back. And like, what do you say to that? Like, what do you say? You say, well, we'll keep the light on for you. Like, I don't know what to say, but prison isn't seen as something bad that you and I might think it as. But I try to do the best I could to give them some skills to live life outside the system and do something different. But that's how I got into it.
Got it. And how, since you started off by teaching, people in the prison, uh, how were your experiences after that when you had to, face normal civilian students to teach? Uh,
Well, they couldn't pull anything over on me, that's for sure. Um, I think like I taught,
did you
when
always
you teach.
introduce, when you started off, you know what, I've taught 1,000 hours in the prison?
When I was at Penn State, I'd be like, listen, I taught at a prison. Don't try to pull one over on me. I think
Right.
students are different. Like it's interesting. The community college students that I've taught, they're mostly non-traditional learners, so they're coming back for change of career or their children are raised and they want something new. So there's a little bit more seriousness there. And you like a lot of times like the rumors are flipped, right? That you're more serious if you go to Penn State or MIT, and you're less serious if you go to community college. And that's really not true. I found that my adult students have always been the most dedicated. They are very worried about their grades. They work really, really hard, and they're managing jobs and children and all the things, elderly parents, whatever. At Penn State, the students, I had Olympians. I had an Olympic rollerblader or something like that. And, so you have to work with their schedules when you're working with the athletes. And there's a different expectation there. And in beginning, when you teach English, you teach composition. So you start off teaching composition. And I had a subspecialty in technical writing. So my theory is that the quicker you can get students into the industries that they're going to work in, the better. So we had a huge aeronautical program at our community college. Penn State has a huge aeronautical program. I could teach you a textbook that teaches you how to write for business or for technical, or I could send you to an airport to meet with some folks that work for Boeing, and you could look at training manuals and you can revise them, or you can create a training manual, or you can create a technical description of something, or whatever. That's going to teach you more, but plus it gives you connections in the industry. Then if you want to, that guy that you met at Boeing, I mean, not Boeing today, this is Boeing 20 years ago, but you'll meet somebody, and it gives you connections. And I would bring speakers in. The students always did presentations at the end of the semester, and I would invite industry leaders to those presentations, again, because that's an authentic audience. I'm just an English teacher. I'm not an authentic audience, but that guy from the airport, that pilot, that person's going to give you the feedback you need. So I think the authentic audience maybe come from the prison, but also from my own experience that, you know, I love talking about Shakespeare. My background's in archetypal theory, which is complicated and boring, but I've never used that in teaching. Like that's what my work was on, looking at archetypes in literature. What do I teach? I teach people how to read and write and how to think critically about what they're reading, not to believe everything they read, and to try to write well. AI has helped tremendously with people, especially people from all different backgrounds. It helps people write well. Grammarly, great tool. So now it's really thinking critically and learning discernment. That I feel like that's the number one skill that anybody can teach anybody, is how to discern good information from bad.
Great. Beth, I want to go to this thing that you spoke about. You figured a way to teach men because men don't read The Secret Lives of Bees, but they are more interested in some sort of a game. Uh, I want to see if we can, elicit a model for others to follow. If they can go and apply this in their classrooms, if they have a bunch of men, if they can, if this is going to help. So if you can share stuff about that, and if you can
Sure.
start from why, how you arrived at that, and if you can go on, that'll be even great.
So I use a lot of different games. I use Dante's Inferno for the 360. Um, uh, so the school that I worked at the time when I did that was an inner city school with a very diverse population. And the research was like, Hispanic men will not read. Sure, they will. I was set out to prove, sure, they will. So the way that all of them worked, I'll use this example, but this can apply to any video game that you use. So for Dante's Inferno, there would be teams of two, and I had a grant. Um, I had a small grant from the National Science Foundation, which helped to pay for student workers. So the student workers played the game forward to the places that I wanted to cover in class. So because games take a long time to play. So, and what a great job. What a great job for a college kid. I get paid $10 an hour to play video games. I mean, that was their job. They just had to play the game to a certain point. So in class, in your team of two, because not everybody's a gamer, right? So, game mechanics, and not everybody's a gamer. So you would have one person who was a gamer that liked to play video games, and one person who was the recorder. And they would have a notebook and they would record. And then they would have the book open, the poem open for Dante's Inferno, and they would be in charge of looking at, in the game, what is borrowed from the poem and what is added by, like, Hollywood, right? What's added, by the game developers to make it interesting. Because the whole idea was, the whole thesis or idea was, does art influence life or does life influence art? And if you play the game Dante's Inferno and that's all you've ever seen of Dante's Inferno, do you think that's the truth? And that's the poem, right? And we see that with movies, reading the book version, watching the movie
Right,
version,
right.
so one of the students would play the game, they would take notes and say, oh, in the Wood of Suicides, this happens and this happens in the book, and this is what happens in the game. And then we would use, at the time, Second Life was big. They would rebuild that. They would pick one of the circles of hell, and they would rebuild it in Second Life with me. I would do their building, and they would do the writing that would go with what they wanted there. And then we partnered that with a book called Linden Hills by Gloria Naylor, an African American novelist, who built it on there. So they were doing sort of three things. They were playing the game, they were analyzing somebody else's vision of it, they were creating their own vision of it, and then comparing it to somebody else's vision of it. So by the end of it, they really knew a lot about Dante's Inferno, about a whole lot of people that they don't care about, a whole lot of Italians they don't care about or know about. I've never heard of, and then they got to create their own modern version of that. Like, who are our people that we would stick in the Inferno? Who would we for the different kinds of sins, would we reorder the hell, like, there, because of the premise of the story, lust is very, like, it's a lesser sin, and treachery and deceit and lying or stuff, or and political stuff is at the most horrible. Would we flip that around? Like, how would we order the sins, in that situation? And they loved it. Like, they loved it. They never once, the students, every once in a while you'd have a student who didn't love it, but they didn't think they were learning. They just thought they were playing a game. But at the end, when you give them sort of that final assessment, they knew about Dante's Inferno. They knew about it. So do a pretest, keep that keep that model for the end. So you give them the same exam at the beginning and the end to see what they remember. Have teams of two. I would say, make every class. I learned this quickly. Every class have a goal. In today's class, we are doing this. You're looking to see what objects are the same. In this class, we're looking to see what words are the same, and keep the class together. So because some are really good at gaming and will fly ahead in the game, you kind of have to keep them together. Otherwise, you as the instructor go a little nutty. Um, and then make sure that at the end of every class, they're doing a writing assignment, something that's actually in your area. So if it's math or writing or whatever, philosophy or whatever, they're doing a task that's related to your discipline, because you don't want to lose sight of your learning outcomes, whatever, for the course, right? You don't want to lose sight of, they need to learn how to read and write, think critically about literature. Like, that's the goal. So what are you going to do? And make them turn something in that holds them accountable. And it worked well. I mean, it worked well. I've done it with Fallout. Fallout's great because that's a choose your own adventure kind of thing. There's
So,
that scene.
Beth, I'm so sorry to intervene. So,
That's okay.
Dante's Inferno was something that you chose because there is a game that is inspired by a literary work, or
Mhm.
is that how you chose? Okay.
That I chose it that, and I chose it because, you know, people are very critical, especially in a Union College, which is in New Jersey, which is where I was at when I did that. It's a very diverse school with a lot of undocumented people at it, or at least at the time I was there. And, oh, there's no way that that group of students can learn Dante's Inferno. I said, watch this. Yes, they can. Because we kind of always we as a culture, we tend to box people in. Well, those people are so whatever, they can't possibly learn that. Sure, they can. It's an approach. If
Right.
if you're going to hand them the text, written in the style in which it was written, most people aren't going to understand it. It doesn't have anything to
Right.
do with social class or race or anything like that. It's a hard text. But if you break it down into pieces that they can handle in a way that they will enjoy, so I wanted to take the hardest thing I could think of, and to
Right.
prove, 'cause if I would have used Secret Life of Bees, which is about rite of passage for women, they would have gotten it. They would have been bored off the rocker. Dante's Inferno, there's that the game elements of it's a good game. And there's lots of it graphically at the time it was an excellent game. And they were into the game and they didn't think they were learning, but you would listen to them and like they'd be like, oh my gosh, I found the thing. And then the kid would be writing it down, and they would get all excited when they would find stuff from the poem, but it was broken down for them so that they could understand it. And then when we brought it all together at the end, like they really did understand what Dante was trying to convey. With this classical difficult literature, they got it. And that's sort of, the power of technology is that we can really make things much more accessible.
Right.
If we're willing to think differently. Not everything works all the time. Not, I throw a lot of things at the wall and see if it sticks. And sometimes, and most of the times it does, but sometimes it doesn't. But Grand Theft Auto works for symbolism. Um, Fallout works. Mass Effect 3 worked really well. So those are some, and
Okay.
there's better games today. Call of Duty.
Okay. I'm gonna dig a little deeper. So just to kind of structure this, basically you teach reading and writing, and for that you take a work that was done in the past by a literature person like Dante, and then you choose Inferno because there is a game that is done based on this, and then there are similar games like so GTA. Was there a book written, and why did you use GTA for symbolism? No. Okay.
So
So
no, there
what did
wasn't a book
you
written for.
teach? Yeah.
That's like really good. So not all of them are based on literature. So Fallout's not literature based, and neither is
Right.
GTA. But GTA, if you watch it, it has a lot of symbolism in it for American culture, and
Right.
and same with Fallout. There are a lot of the symbols of American culture, and there are a lot of different objects that sort of mean something maybe to an American audience that maybe don't mean the same thing to an external audience. And what does it say about our ideas of freedom? So if I'm teaching, I teach mostly now American Romantics, which is Emerson, Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and then the next period, which is realism and naturalism. So I use those games to talk about, like, okay, this is post-apocalyptic world, right? What does it say about the society that we left? And what does it say about the society they're creating? What are they keeping from our
Mm.
society? That's for
Right.
Fallout. And then for Grand Theft Auto, it's the idea that point of view, like who's telling the story? Are you telling it as a criminal? Are you telling it as a law enforcement officer? Like how are you playing the story and what perspective? And what does
Mhm.
this object look like if you're looking at it as this character or this character or this character? What happens before the story starts and what happens after you leave the game? If a game, blows up at the end and there's no next, right? That's the end. But most stories, even Dante's Inferno, have a before this started and after this ends. What does that look like? So you talk about you're in those examples, you're talking about literary principles, and sometimes it's better to remove it from a book because then the students have to really think about those concepts independent of a book so they can apply them afterwards. And then I'll pick a novel afterwards that then we apply it to something like um for Grand Theft Auto, we looked at a bunch of different short stories like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, which is a great short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin, and we talk about how these symbols sort of appear in stories that were written after, or these stories were written way before these games were created, but how those principles are universal and apply. We could nerd out
Got it.
forever, Bit.
Very interesting. And say for a game like GTA, what do the students take away at the end of it
Well, they're looking
from
for
a learning
symbolism.
point of view?
So they're looking for symbolism in there because the symbols are easy to spot, graffiti and things like that, and art, like the difference between art and vandalism. Like we have a whole discussion about that. And then, so what they take away are symbols in our society and then what people draw on today to write novels today. Because what we use as symbolism today is a good example of this is the rainbow, right? So if you look
Mm.
at older literature, the rainbow meant one thing, but now the rainbows come to be associated, at least in American culture, with the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
So, how symbols change over time, right? So in GTA, there's all kinds of different like guns and sexual objects and things like that that you find and pick up and see in the background and stuff, so that I'm in a seedy place, or I'm in a nice place, or I'm in a bad place, or that's a bad person, and how much of that is fact or fiction. So it's really that discernment and critical thinking that we want students to learn. I really think video games are the newest form of literature because they all have stories, like the good games, even like Call of Duty. There's a story there, right? And you're part of that story. You're creating that story. So it is very much that genre of choose your own adventure, sort of happening second by second. You don't have to wait a few pages to get there. And how does that impact the choices that you make in life? Like, because now you can play a game from everybody's angle. Which angle are you going to choose in your own life? So that's, a little philosophical, but that is the purpose of literature, to inspire us to think about the human condition. And I think video games do that exceptionally well.
Got it. That's great. Now, I also want to go back to a point where you said you used an open source program to teach people about sentence structuring and stuff like that. Could you talk about that? What was that all about?
Sure. Sure. So, I've always been an open educator. I've always been involved in the Creative Commons movement. I really think that education should be free. I think that it should be accessible to everybody. And so back when Wiki Spaces was around, which I miss it, I wish somebody would bring it back. I was able to put all of my content online for free, so with the intention of third world countries being able to access it and use it, because they could get internet in Sierra Leone on their flip phones, but we couldn't get books there because of how you had to pay the there's so much corruption. You have to pay so many fines and, taxes and all these, you have to get stuff there, but I could get them on a wiki. So, um, I lost your question. So I started using, I think one of the first ones I used was, the first game that I ever used was, can't remember the name of it now that I'm thinking about it. Um, so long ago. I had seen a presentation from a fella at Drexel who was doing it with organic chemistry graduate students. And
Hmm.
and you could work with the game and you could manipulate the maps. And he was doing organic chemistry structures. So I said, well, I could do that with grammar. So you would go on each level and you would shoot the correct sentence. It was four identical sentences. One was grammatically correct. You would shoot it, and you would go up the levels. And when you got to all 20 levels, you got a picture of my cat. That was the winning prize. But if you got any wrong on level 18, you went back to the start and you had to start over. So after that, I worked with Oregon Trail is in the public domain. So you could work with that code and you could create an Oregon Trail kind of game. And so I worked with that. And then when Alexa developed, do you remember I mean, you can still make these. When Alexa's first came out, they had the trivia games that you could play on the Alexa. Well, all of that code is available, right? They made that code available to everybody. So all you really had to do was go in and change. You didn't have to program. You didn't need to know anything about programming. You just needed to change the sentences. So we would go in and they would become an expert in something, baseball, whatever they wanted, and then they would make their sentences, and then they'd have to think like, what might people ask? And this technology is going to be, it's going to permeate, it is permeating their world, right? So they're going to have to learn how to ask better questions. Now with AI, we know that with prompt engineering, the better the kind of question you ask, the better information you get. So this was sort of precursor to that. So having them think through that and then what kind of responses you would give them. And then, of course, getting factual information and interesting information and then writing it correctly, because if you don't write it correctly, it doesn't say it correctly. So, there are all these things to think about. And so to them, they were programming an Alexa game. These are like ESL, English as a second language learners, or these are, first level learners who think, oh, I can't write it all in English. You know what? I'm not learning English. I'm learning how to program an Alexa. But they're learning how to program sentences. They're learning sentence structure. They're learning now Grammarly probably would tremendously help it even more because you could write they would write their sentences first in Word and then copy them into the game. And so they really, really loved it. And then it's something their families can play. So we had gotten a bunch of but this is way back in the beginning. We got a few Echo Dots that were donated to us by Amazon. The students could win them for the best game, and people voted on them, and then they could go home and play that with their family.
Yeah.
And look at this cool thing. And then when they went to an employer, they could say, "Look at this thing I made." And what a great artifact to have in your toolkit. I'm so sorry. That's my husband, and he is very hard of hearing. Your phone is on. I'm so sorry.
No problem. No problem.
I've been working from home since the pandemic, and you would think that it was the first day. Every day, you think it's the first day that I have not worked from home. So sorry.
When I was just reading your LinkedIn section, saw some series of heavy things like, um, Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence programming, ethical hacking, cyber gaming, gamification, drones, voice programming, and the digital humanities. I mean, is, what, how do you manage, or, at what level do you work on these things? I
That's a
just
great
want
question.
you to share the methodology or how you make time or your structure that you use.
So, I don't know if you're familiar with hiking. I live on the Appalachian Trail and I'm a big time hiker. So I always say that, if you're an educator, you're sort of born, it's a vocation, right? I mean, some people go into it just because it's, a good job and you have off in the summer, but most of us it's a vocation for us. And so the main path, the main trail is that, but there are a lot of blue blazes, a lot of little side trails. So over time, depending on the projects I'm working with and the grants that I have and the partners I make, there's nothing better than connecting students, especially internationally, right? Like if you had a group of students, Jag, I would say, what can we do with them? How can I get my students connected with yours? Because this is the world they're going into, a very connected world, much, much more connected than it was for me 20, 35 years ago when I was in school. How do we get them connected? Because their jobs could be anywhere in the world, right? And now especially since the pandemic, if anything good came out of the pandemic, it really flattened the world and made it so that we can really, we're having this conversation in a way that we would never have been able to have 20 years ago, without complications and all kinds of things. So, um, all of those pieces, I like augmented reality. I we just did a project. I had a little mini grant where we did a project for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which is a big movement in our college. And we made a tree, and then had all of our different caucuses on it, and then we had the people on the caucuses welcome. So you would go up and you hold your phone over the picture, and it has somebody speaking. I like to do the holograph technology, the Pepper's Ghost effect. So you can do that with recycled CDs, and it's super easy. These are all things that you can do for free, low cost. I feel like as much as we can do, especially in rural areas and places where, I had the good fortune to be at MIT for a summer. They have amazing resources and they do amazing things, and it's an amazing school. And a very certain kind of student goes there, and it's fantastic. But most students are not at MIT. Most
Mhm.
students are somewhere else, right? Whether it's a state school or a private Catholic school or a community college. So, how can we give them the experience and the same access? So I got involved in all the different technologies because I was teaching something that related to that. So drone technology, I like drones. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I think they're awesome. I don't get to play with them anymore though. But in my role that I'm in now in New Jersey, I had much more time and ability to play with a lot of different technologies. In my role now, right now we're doing a lot of like changing our learning management system, lots of technical stuff that's important, but I don't have the same kind of time to teach the 107, which is the basic pilot license class. But even just getting drones, bringing a drone in and talking with students about drone technology. Our students today are watched every second of their lives. There really is very little privacy. We grew up, I don't know how old you are, Jag, but for me, like, we could go and like mess around in the woods behind my parents' house and nobody was taking pictures, but today people are taking video of you when you don't know it. You might be having like a little fit, this happened to some friends of mine. One of them was having a fit about something and it wasn't a big deal. Like back in the day, that wouldn't have been a big deal, but somebody else recorded it and then somebody else put it on YouTube. And like, there's no sense of like, you always have to be on stage. You never have time to just be yourself. And those are things that you can talk about, but it's better when you can show them with a drone and they get to fly the drone and they get to look in a window. That was what I would always do. I would have them put it up in the air and fly it over to one of the office windows that somebody had permission to do it with. And then that person would turn around and wave. But to show that if that person didn't know it was there, and then with IoT, like we teach a lot of nursing students at the community college level. If you work at a facility that's a drug rehab, how would you know if a smart toilet got hacked? How would you know that as a nurse? How would you know if the bed, if you're working in a wing that's dealing with folks with eating disorders like anorexia, how would you know if the bed weight, device was hacked? How would you know it and how would you fix it? And then from a criminal justice perspective, because I teach cybercrime, what do you do to make sure that you preserve evidence that can then be used in court? And who actually are you going after? If it's an international crime, who do you go after? If it's a dark web crime, who are you going after? How are you finding it? How are you collecting evidence? So all of the technologies I use it because I've used them in some sort of class in some sort of way to help students think about their world. I always say my goal is to have martinis in space. And people think I'm ridiculous when I say this, but this is true. Virgin Galactic, they have flights already in space. Elon Musk, SpaceX, they've got commercial flights going into space. You don't need to be trained as an astronaut. You're not getting sometime. I mean, I think Elon's folks are getting off the ships, but Virgin Galactic, you're not getting out. You're just up there for 15 minutes taking pictures of the Earth, and you're coming back down. The first company who figures out how to deliver wine and cheese up in space, they're going to make a lot of money. So why not partner a school like MIT who has the physics and the background to figure out the physics of that with a community college who are trained in hospitality? We have programs in hospitality and drink mixing. Partner those folks together. First company who does that, they get more people. You're up there taking your pictures, drinking your wine or whatever, and then you're coming back down. Like that's the future that our students are facing. They're not facing 20-year-old technology of toll booths and whatnot. They're looking ahead, and so I think more partnerships between the bigger schools and community colleges, those are great. More funding for innovation. We say innovation, but then we get scared of it. you know, People will be like, I want you to be innovative. Oh, wait, how much does that cost? And I try to do everything for super cheap because I've always worked at schools with no money. Northampton's better position, but still, like the state of education is changing, and so there's not as much money to do all the things you want to do. So, if I'm a grant funder, I want to give money to something that's going to have the most impact. If I'm giving out money, so I want to see partnerships from industry, from different kinds of schools, from different kind of learners. So
Right.
I don't know if that answered your question. I probably answered 20 other questions and not the one you asked, but there you go.
That's the whole point of, having a podcast and, not an email written interview. But Beth, I'm probably, go and address some of the topics that we listed down during a pre-podcast call. Um, One of them is you work in a Northampton Community College now. And so what is a community college and how is it different from a for-profit college?
So a community college is a 2-year school that feeds either transfer students to a 4-year school or it sends students right into industry. So for example, we have our community, Northampton Community College is very unique. Most community colleges do not have an international program. Most community colleges do not have a dormitory. We do. We have programs that a lot of other community colleges don't have. And we have a very, very good relationship with our community. So that community colleges kind of came into favor in the US in the 1960s. And the funding formula was supposed to be like a third of the funding comes from the area school districts for the community college, a third comes from the state, and then a third comes from tuition that the students pay. I don't know of any community college that's ever like that formula has never ever been used. That was put on paper, but that's not really it. So our very first president at Northampton was so smart, and he went out and he had relationships with all of the industries and businesses in the area, including the Bethlehem Steel, and including the big industries. So they started building an endowment early, where other community colleges weren't thinking that way. So that's one of the reasons that Northampton's positioned well and has a very good reputation in the community. So we have a fantastic nursing program. So those students come to us and they go right into the nursing field. We have a funeral service program. So they come to us, they go right into the funeral service field. And then when industries say, hey, this happened a few years ago, the line workers, the ones that put up the poles for the electrical lines, they came and said, listen, our employees are aging out. They're all retiring. We have a desperate need to train workers. We were able to stand up within a few months a line pole program. They helped fund it, but we put it on our property. There's these poles, and that program is super super successful, training line workers, which now they're dealing with. Our line workers are down in Florida and in the southeastern United States, dealing with Hurricane Helene and now Hurricane Milton. So like, we just have a really good connection with our community, and we're very responsive. Four-year institutions are often well funded through grants through the National Science Foundation and things like that. It's hard for us sometimes to get money directly from an NSF or an NEH, because they're looking at four-year research institutions, but we're fantastic partners for a four-year research institution. So, there was a grant when I was in New Jersey that was through NASA, where we were teaching online astronomy at the community college level, and that partnered up to Rutgers, and then it partnered up, and NASA was funding it. The funding technically went to Rutgers, and then we were a subsidiary to them. But it helps everybody, and it gives students, I mean, the students in those classes, they got to say, like, I did a project with NASA. Like, who gets to say that on the resume? So community college students, the average age is usually 27 to 29. It's usually females returning to the workforce after raising children or after career changes. And we have seen, at least at Northampton, a very large, since the pandemic, a very large are coming online. They're not into that traditional college experience of, I want to join clubs and I want to be part of a sorority. They're like, I have to work and I have to take care of my parents and I have to take care of my children, and I want to go to school, get done, and get my job. So, the nature is different. And I think community colleges are very well experienced in change. We're able to change a little bit better. Penn State's an amazing school. I was very, very honored to work there, but it's a little harder to move the bus at a four-year because of all of the grants and ties and connections that they have to maintain. We don't offer graduate degrees. We offer 2-year degrees and certificates. And then our students, back when I was a student, most students transferred. But now we're seeing a bigger increase in going into automotive technology or going into plumbing or HVAC or whatever. And nursing and the allied health is just a huge, huge field. Criminal justice, a lot of our students go into the police academy. So it's a 2-year degree to prepare them for either transfer and we also have a huge non-credit program too. So the courses that I teach for ethical hacking, you don't get credit for those, but now we're working on bridging. Like, if you take so many of these, they can qualify to give you credit here, so that applies on the other side. So I will say I've worked at all kinds of different schools, and my heart belongs to community colleges. I think they really are underrated in many places, and they do tremendous work. The biggest sticking point is that it's not prestigious. Like, it's not MIT, it's not Princeton. So, when you're telling your friends, oh, my kid's going to Princeton, everybody's like, oh, they're going to community college. Oh, what they do wrong? Were they bad in school? Like, why, how'd they get there? Fortunately, Northampton doesn't have that reputation, but other places that I lived, the community colleges are sometimes looked down on, and they really are a gem. They are a prized diamond in their communities because they can really train people quickly and they do a great job. And all the professors from the 4-year schools teach at community colleges as adjuncts, so they're getting the same instructors, and you're paying. Oh, this is the big part. It's a fraction of the cost. One course is like $1,600 as opposed to $7,000 somewhere else. So it's
Wow.
a yeah.
Is there a case, to be made, or, is there any reason why students who probably, can go to a 4-year course, is there any better reason for them to attend a college like Northampton Community College? Is there? Would you
Oh,
recommend that?
absolutely. Because you take the same, when you think about a 4-year degree, your first 2 years are your core, no matter where you go. Now, if you're going
Mhm.
to Ivy League, Princeton, Stanford, clearly there's an advantage. You go right there. And sometimes I think Princeton just started allowing transfers. For a long time. They didn't allow transfer students. So if you're going to Ivy League, you go to Ivy League. But if you're going to a 4-year like state school, like East Stroudsburg or Penn State or whatever, you're going to take English one no matter where you go. So why pay $7,000 for it when you can pay, 1,200 and have the same instructor? Like it's so much cheaper. And honestly, this is really the difference. I don't know what kind of doctors you have access to, but we have doctors and we have physician assistants here in the States. And doctors are always very busy and, in and out, and they don't ask a lot of questions. But the physician's assistants, they're much more detailed, they're much more, focused on you. And I would say that the difference between having taught at both kinds of schools is that at a 4-year school, the faculty member is responsible to do research and publish, research or perish, right? And they have so many responsibilities for their labs if they're in science and whatever, that the student isn't always their focus. Where we're practitioners at a community college, our only focus is student success. So you're getting a great education with people who really care about you. Like, you stop coming to class, your teacher is going to call you. Your professor is going to figure out where you are. Your professor really cares that you make it. When I was at Penn State, I had bigger classes and I had TAs that worked with me. I didn't know every student's name. It wouldn't be possible for me to figure out, where's Jag today? Like, is there something going on in his life? I didn't have that ability because there was just too many. So,
Right.
there's such an advantage if you really need a personal. I don't think as an 18-year-old I would have done well. I graduated high school at 17. I would not have done well at a 4-year school. I would have gotten lost in the partying and all that because I was young. Because I had to go to community college because I didn't really have an education background. I was with 30-year-old people, women. I'll never forget this in my math class. They were 30 years old. They had returned to school because they had all lost their jobs at a sewing mill that had closed, a silk mill. They were all becoming nurses, and we were all in this math class together. And every day we met at the cafeteria and we practiced our math, which was foreign to me. I never had algebra. And, the women would say to me, listen, you're 18. You're 18 and your parents are paying for this. Shut up and do your homework. Like you have that
Right.
community you might not have had at a 4-year school. But by the time I got to my 4-year school, I was a good student. I knew how to take tests. I knew how to study. I knew how to prioritize my time. I wasn't, eager, I had a lot of friends, but that wasn't the priority for me. It was really learning. And I had taken all of our courses that I ended up having to go to Lehigh University to continue taking English courses because I had maxed out the courses that we offered because I was such a nerd. I would not have been such a nerd had I gone right to 4-year out of high school.
Wow. Got it. Beth, and you said, you are the associate dean of the online of Northampton Community College. And I mean, after having spoken to a lot of people in the past, I understand that, online didn't come about because of the pandemic in the US. It's been there for a long time now. But talking about Northampton Community College, you offer in person and online, and you also have hybrid and other programs different for each of these modes, or is it all the same? How does that work?
So modalities, the different modalities we offer online, in person, hybrid, and flex. So the
Oh,
difference
wow,
is
flex. Okay.
flex is so online and face to face, those are brick and mortar, sometimes it's called, or traditional. Those are the two big models. But
Hmm.
flex and hybrid depends on when you meet. So flex might be you meeting in person 3 days a week, and then you're doing, or 2 days a week, and then you're doing your time online. or you're splitting up the class with an online course that's at a specific day and time, Tuesdays from 11 to 12, and then doing online work. So, and we see the students really choosing those flexible modalities because they work, they're busy. You know, remember our typical age is not an 18-year-old student, it is a 27-year-old working adult. So, or 29-year, it goes in that little range. So, Northampton's had online learning for a long, long time, and they've done a really good job with it. So in online learning, you have to follow standards because in order to receive federal financial aid dollars, you must pass an accreditation. Ours is called Middle States, and we're actually going through that process right now. And you have to show that the students in all modalities get the exact same education. So back in the Wild West, because I've been in this industry forever, I've been in it since they started using online stuff. Back in the olden days, people would just throw their PowerPoints up and call that online learning. Well, the federal government said, well, that's kind of a correspondence course. Like, we're not paying for that. You have to prove to us that the student sitting on that in that course is the person of record, right? That it's not me taking your class. And you have to prove that they're getting the same instruction, the same interaction, the same opportunities as that student sitting in front of you in a physical classroom. So that has changed, the regulations have changed over time, and how we show evidence of that has changed over time. But it gets better and better every year. So we have better tools, and really because of the pandemic, right? The pandemic, when we had to put everybody online, those who had refused to go online before that, now they're in that space, and they went either one way or another. They were like, wow, this is awesome. I had no idea. Or they were like, how do you do this? And how do you prove that JAG is JAG? And how do you make sure they're not cheating on tests? And I always like the naysayers, the complainers. You learn so much from them because I'm a champion. I'm a champion cheerleader. I'm always going to think AI is fantastic. I need that person going, wait, it's got a bias. Wait, it's got this. Wait, I need that naysayer because that helps me to see the whole picture. You know, and that happened during the pandemic. You know, now that we've gone back into sort of, I don't want to ever say that we're normal. We're never going back to 2019, no matter how much people try. The students are like, wow, I didn't think I could do online learning, but I can. Other students said, no way, I can't. Like, and some disciplines just aren't, you don't want your nurse trained online. You know, can you do it? Sure. But you want your nurse to know where your elbow is and actually have seen one in life, right? You want your nurse to, you want your funeral director to know actually how to, you know, do embalming, like, and that has to happen in physical space. But, you know, can English be taught online? Sure. Can philosophy be taught online? Sure. Can theory courses be taught online? Sure. You know, it's, you know, line worker, you need them climbing poles,
Good.
you know. So I think the online is improving um, the culture around it and sort of the stigma. You know, we always laugh in the industry because they, you know, online was on a shelf and it was like the stepchild. You know, well, we know we have online, you know, but we're not looking at them. We're not gonna give them any resources. Then the pandemic hit, and we saved our schools. Now, I'm very fortunate because Northampton has always been very gracious and has always really supported online learning. So I didn't have the frustrations I know a lot of my colleagues had at other schools. But, you know, it was as soon as the pandemic sort of, you know, go away, they put the online back up on a shelf. At Northampton, we're being very purposeful. Like, you know, we see our stats, we see our data, and the data says that the biggest group growing are the online students. How do we serve them? How do we make sure they're getting the same services online that they get if they come? How do they get an advisor? How do they get a check in with healthcare? How do they get wellness help? How do they get tutoring? How do they get you know, how do they work on their FAFSA or whatever, you know, their financial aid stuff? So we were really purposeful, and you know, I think we have a lot to learn. All the whole industry has a lot to learn. Um, but, you know, it's an exciting time, I think, to work in online education.
Got it, Ben. I'll probably conclude with this question. As a associate dean of online learning and education technology, what are the problems that you're solving today, um, or you're looking to solve, you know, for to achieve the same things that you just said, you know, how to serve the online students in the best possible way as much as you do for the in-person students.
You know, I think the biggest problem that we have to solve in education in general is the speed at which technology advances and our ability to keep up with it. And AI is a
Mm.
perfect example of that. I specialize in AI. I help a lot of faculty who come to me and say, "Did Jag use AI?" There's no tool that will tell you that. There's no tool that's good enough because whatever is made today will not be accurate tomorrow. So there's nobody pouring money into that. Elon's not pouring money into that. So maybe what has to happen is we change the assignments. And I remember back, I don't know if this was true for you, Jag, but I don't, in my school days back in 100 years ago, we had the abacus and then they invented the calculator, and your teachers would not let you have the calculator in the class with you. You had to do all your stuff by hand. You're not going to be able to take a calculator with you everywhere. Oh, yes, you can. I have my phone with me all the time. So, I think we have to really become adaptable as educators to understand that the world, if you think back even just 20 years, what everything looked like then to now, and what it's going to look like 20 years from now, I could never have predicted what, like Facebook and Twitter X or I mean, YouTube is just an amazing platform in and of itself with its ability to give great content and also misinformation, right? So, we have all these tools, and our best help is to help students to learn how to use them ethically and correctly and to discern the information that comes out of them. Because, we can tell them, oh, you can't use AI. It's built into Word. It's already there. It's been there. It's not, this isn't new. That you just heard of ChatGPT doesn't mean that we haven't been using AI for years in various places. When have that little app for your bank, privacy is a whole different thing than it was to us. We have to help students understand you are being watched. Be careful what you say. Be careful what you write down. Everything is discoverable. I don't know how it is where you are, but here we're a very litigious society. Everything is discoverable. Every phone, it doesn't matter if you crack that phone and cook it in the microwave, they can still get the data because it's hosted in the cloud.
Yeah,
Like you see
it's
on
the same.
TV,
It's the same.
it's not accurate. So I think we have to figure out a way to change faster. Also with the legal in our legal system, like we don't have a way to change our laws quick enough to bring bad actors to justice, right? So when people do horrible things with the dark web or whatever, we have no way to solve those crimes because they're international crimes. You've got Joe here in the US, you've got Tina in Taiwan, you've got Susie in Canada, and somebody in Australia. Who's most responsible? Who's got the server? Like where, like we don't have a good way to solve problems because we think with that old mentality of everybody gets a say. Sometimes you just have to act. um you got to throw something at the wall and see if it sticks and then move on. But we are a culture, I think, internationally, of we don't want failure. So we don't want to throw that spaghetti on the wall and it not stick. And then people say, oh, because our media will just blast that out of the water, right? So, there's a lot of pieces to why we don't move quicker. And I understand those. And there's a lot of litigation. And that's why we don't move faster. And as we're doing that, they're sending commercial flights up to space without martinis. I don't even drink martinis, by the way. For me, it would be like I would like an iced tea in space, but martinis in space sound so much more fun. But when you look at Elon Musk, for whatever people think of who he is or how he behaves or whatever, I don't even know that much about him. He's getting things done. The guy from Virgin Galactic, he's a records company guy, and he got something done. He didn't wait for people to give him permission. He didn't care. Like he's flying people up to take pictures of the Earth. They don't get out. They don't have to be trained as astronauts. And I don't know how, but I will say the media does latch on when they're not successful. One explosion, it's terrible, it doesn't work. They've had how many successful ones? So our culture is going to, I think, continue to shift dramatically, and education has to think differently about what they do.
Got it, Beth. One of the problems that you said you're trying to solve is, one of the faculty comes to you and asks, "Hey, did he use AI?" And, you felt that, we need to change the assignments. So by that, have you thought about something? Does that assignment, okay, what are those? Yeah, please.
So I teach with AI. So on my syllabus, and every school is different in what they require, but your syllabus is your contract with your students. So you should have a statement in your syllabus that says, "This is my expectation." And my syllabus statement, which I provide to anybody that asks for it, that they can adapt is, we will use AI in this course. There will be times when you will not be able to use AI. I do not have to prove it. I just have to suspect it. And then we're going to have a conversation. And then after that conversation, you'll either get a 0 on the assignment or you'll be allowed to revise the assignment. And I always take a writing sample the first day in handwriting. And if it's an online course, they take a picture of it and they send it to me. Now, could they look it up on AI and then copy it? I'm sure. But, it's usually like write a letter to yourself, something very like not hard, something very simple, just so I get it. Like, this is how Jag writes. I
Right.
keep that on file. I would do it in a math class. I would do it in a biology class. A letter. What I do is the letter to yourself. Write a letter to yourself for the final exam, giving yourself encouragement, and then they write it down. They don't know. I don't call it a writing sample. I just say like they think of me and I'm like, she's hippy dippy. Like, this is some hippy dippy thing she's doing. It's a writing sample, and I keep it, and I do give it back to them at the final. So that's your first line is make sure your policies are clear and that you're clear. And then what I do is, like, I have my students did a conversation between Henry David Thoreau and a national park ranger from today, and they had to talk about climate change, right? Because the American Romantic period is about environmentalism. So I said you can use ChatGPT. I actually like Gemini better. Google Gemini, I think it does a better job. Perplexity, and I go through some different tools with them, and they could pick whatever they want when they want, and they had to create the conversation using AI. Then they had to go back and find references, like, where did AI get that information? Look through Walden, look through civil disobedience, look through different writings, and try to figure out Scooby Doo. Try to figure out where they get the information. So now they're doing research, and they're finding primary sources. So then they could say, "Oh, that's a hallucination. Like, that's bull crap." And then we look for bias. Like, was it at all biased? And then you teach them how to use it ethically and how to spot it. AI always defaults to business language. If you've ever noticed, it doesn't default to education language. So
Yeah.
if you to write an email, it's going to use business language, right? So it does kind of the same thing when it comes to literature. It kind of devolves to history as opposed to literature. So I use it with them, and I always tell them I'm a wizard too, so I'm going to know if they cheat. And and I think that, the scare tactics have never worked with students ever for anything. And we pretend that cheating is new. Cheating has been around for 100 years. We have students who pay people to take their classes in our learning management system. They give the username and password, which is a violation of the acceptable use policy, but they give it. So technically, these companies aren't hacking. They've been hired and given credentials. They come and do the work, and then halfway through, they're like, if you pay us $700 more, we won't tell on you. And the students either pay it or don't. And then if they don't, bad things happen. Like, they send, if the school allows for sharing of instant messaging or whatever through the LMS, it'll send pornographic material out. Or last week we got one where they wrote to us directly and said, this guy owes us $750. Do you think I'm paying his ransom for him? Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Right. So, we have to think about, cheating has been around forever,
Right.
and we can look at IP addresses and say, okay, they were in Kenya and in Allentown, Pennsylvania at the same time, the same day. Probably not the same person, but even IP spoofers, like, I mean, there's so many layers to all of the things. Cheating isn't new, and AI, it just makes it faster, but it's not different. So you rely on it. Have students use it. Have students play with it and manipulate it, and how we all played with the calculators to make words. I don't know if you all turned your
Right.
calculator
Right.
over because
Right.
it
Right.
say hell. That was like a big deal when you were in the fourth grade. Have them use it. They are we make it's like everything else. When you make something so taboo, then everybody's like, oh, I want to see that. When it becomes part of the daily operations, like, oh, AI, oh gosh, she makes us use it. Well, like, it just becomes different. It's a different vibe.
Got it, Beth. Beth, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on all of the things that I've been asking you. Um, Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, and I do appreciate being here, and it's great to talk. And you have my contact information if anybody has questions or follows up or wants to do a grant with me. we could work together, get our students together.
Got it,
All
Beth.
right.